Should we get started?
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the T&E Committee. Thanks for accommodating the schedule, the ribbon cutting today.
Okay.
Dr. Orlin.
Thank you. In this packet, you see two sets of changes. Those that are highlighted in yellow are, again, changes to the original bills introduced, which we've been informally calling the Leggett bill, as compared to the Elrich bill, which is his comments from February. We also see several changes that are showing in gray. When we compared literally the Leggett bill to the Elrich bill, we found a whole host of really non-substantive issues. A lot of them just word changes or capitalizations that, to be consistent, we recommend to you just en banc approving all of those. So I guess that's the first question: is are you okay with all the gray changes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Great changes? Without objection?
So just to say, I'm good with council staff's changes. I've reviewed everything, so that's sort of across the board. We can get into that. So is that the gray or is that the yellow?
No, the gray was non-substantive. So whenever you look at the bill,
Gotcha.
on circles 1 through 37, you see a lot of things in gray.
Gotcha.
Those are literally changes to the original bill that was introduced that were mostly in the
Thank you.
the Elrich version.
I'm good with those.
Good with those. Okay, so we just think there's like literally 11 remaining issues, which are mostly relatively small, but they're substantive. Not very substantive, but substantive. A couple cases they're really substantive. Okay, so number one on the top of page 2, basically the goal of this bill is to try to create TMDs ultimately all over the county, except in the green policy areas. And neither the Leggett bill nor the Elrich bill really pins that down. And so we're recommending language there in bold in the middle of page 2, which would say the county council by resolution may create a TMD in the red, orange, or yellow policy areas as defined in the subdivision staging policy. And then something that's in the both versions of the bill, which we continue here, would say a district may be formed from all or portions of one or more policy areas, even if they're not contiguous. Just as a side point, back in the winter when DOT came over with an idea as to what the boundaries might be, I had come up with a different set of boundaries which were all contiguous. When we come back to this issue, which is 2 or 3 steps further down the road in terms of legislation, I think we'll have that discussion again. But the bill there's no problem with the bill continuing to say that they might not be contiguous. But I think substantively, we'll have that discussion at a later time. It does not be part of this bill. So basically, that last sentence we're all in agreement on for now.
Sounds good. Don't know how we would manage horses in the TMD anyway, so that's the ag reserve, right? Sorry.
Yeah, we wouldn't do it.
TMD humor.
Yeah, we wouldn't do it in the
All right.
ag reserve. Issue number 2, the Leggett bill says the director must require employers.
That one, Evan?
I'm sorry, must require an employer subject to this section to submit a TDM plan meeting the requirements of this section of the bill if the council by resolution or in the SSP has approved the use of traffic mitigation. The Elrich bill just leaves out that last phrase because, again, the intent is regardless of whether there's a council resolution or subdivision staging policy approving the use of traffic mitigation, it's something that the goal of the bill is to establish TMDs everywhere within the red, yellow, and orange policy areas. I should say, with the exception of Rockville and Gaithersburg, which we don't have jurisdiction over anyway, and federal enclaves, which we don't have jurisdiction over. So that's the only change there. So we're recommending agreeing with the Elrich version of the bill. I'll just keep going on, I guess.
Without objection.
Okay.
Do you want to just, I assume you're okay with it if we just move on?
Yeah,
I think we're all good with that. Without objection.
Silence
Okay, without
is
objection, yeah.
Yes.
Okay,
silence
got
is
it,
gold.
got it.
Item 3 on the top of page 3. This is really directed to help the employers a little bit. The original language in the bill said that the DOT director can require an employer to identify the number of full and part-time employees working for the organization at a workplace in that district. The problem is that you have several companies that have employees in maybe several TMDs. And the Elrich language would not have that requirement that had to be done, several times if that is the instance. So we agree with the Elrich language for that.
Great.
Number 4, the DOT's approval of a project-based TDM plan in the original bill says that the approval must be obtained prior to planning board approval or prior to DPS approval of projects not requiring planning board action. The development community felt pretty unhappy with the idea that these things needed to be figured out before subdivision approval because a lot of times it could take longer. And so the Elrich version of the bill would say the approval must be obtained prior to the issuance of a building permit, whether or not they need to have subdivision approval. And
So to be clear, the Elrich version of the bill makes the development community happier.
yes,
Okay.
well, happier.
Just wanted to be clear about that.
Anybody here from the development? They're never happy.
I think it's less unhappy.
Less unhappy.
I don't know about that. They're not terribly unhappy.
There's always refs to be worked.
There's always a problem. We love you out there. Whatever. Number 5. I have to remember what this is now. The Leggett bill. That's right. The Leggett bill says that the new development required to have a TDM plan that meets the goals of the master plans or subdivision staging policy in terms of what the overall mode share goal is for that area. And you recall one of the things we said in the last work session was that where there isn't a goal stipulated in a master plan or in the SSP, one of the things we'd like to see in the next SSP is that every area has a goal explicitly listed. But with this, the Elrich language had basically added to it the idea that the goal might be set by, in some cases, by executive reg. And we felt, council staff felt like, no, that kind of policy really needs to be set by the council. So in this case, we concur with the original Leggett bill language. Item number 6 has gotten some controversy from the development community. This is where a project plan comes in, a new development, and the TDM plan is making progress towards, I'm sorry, if the development is making progress towards meeting the goal generally, the Leggett bill would say that's okay. And what is progress? Progress is actually defined more specifically in the executive reg when we get that. The Elrich bill would say, no, if it's a new development, the goal ought to be progress towards an objective of 5% higher than whatever the goal is. The idea being is that the entire area ultimately needs to be at the goal, but we actually have some leverage on new development. We have no leverage on existing development. And existing development still, in every case, even in areas that are growing a lot, is going to be the overwhelming amount of the base, if you will. And so we're agreeing with the Elrich bill that new development comes up, that if a goal in an area like Bethesda is 55%, which is what it is, then the base goal would be 60% for new development, as opposed to 55%, with the idea that maybe we can bring everybody else up to a higher level of existing, but again, we have no leverage over them. All we can do is throw a lot of carrots at them in terms of fair share program, doing all kinds of other things in terms of providing more transit service, but we can't make them restrict parking. We can't make them run shuttle buses. We can't make them do X, Y, and Z. So that's why we came on board with the Elrich version. So,
Question about this. So when we did the Bethesda master plan recently, we set, I thought, an NADMS goal based on what we thought new development would achieve.
It was based on what all of Bethesda could get to, most of which, I'm going to get the numbers, I think it's like 28 million, 27 million of existing development, and another 4 or 5 million of new development, that the end result of that was a blended rate between residential and commercial of 55% non-auto driver mode share.
So based on your experience, is let's talk just specifically about Bethesda, is the 55 plus 5, is that something that is achievable in Bethesda for new development?
It's achievable, and we have a program of services that we've identified to allow it to achieve that. But we do anticipate that the new development will need to exceed the performance of existing development if we're going to get there.
Which, perfectly reasonable for a new development to exceed existing development?
That's the intention of this language, yes.
All right.
Now, the goal for Bethesda itself is quite ambitious, so whether that goal is appropriate and can be achieved is a different question altogether. We have a program to do it, but it is a very ambitious goal.
Are we going to do we take up those NADMSs in the SSP, or are they done? Is it only ones that we have not done yet?
A lot of NADMS goals are in master plans.
Yeah.
And the SSP repeats those. So if it's been set in Bethesda, it says now in the SSP also it says 55% is the blended goal. But as I was saying earlier, there are a lot of areas that don't have any goal. They're not identified in a master plan. They're not in the SSP. And we're asking in the next SSP that all the areas have goals, either residential and commercial goals or a blended goal. So we're hoping that will come out of the next year's SSP.
So we will be conscious in the future when we set the NADMS goal in a master plan that new development will be whatever that goal is plus 5. We've never had that discussion in the past. So I get a little heartburn on this, but if you think it's practical.
Again, it's progress towards the goal. Again, there's a lot of,
Okay.
Again, the regs will talk about what does progress mean. And so there's still flexibility in this.
Okay.
But the goal is, the bar is set a little higher.
So it's not like any development that doesn't hit 60% is immediately going to get the hammer. No, that's not what we're doing here.
No.
I would mention that we have a fairly long timeline on that as we've been thinking through it in the draft regs at least. I think it was 6 years, something like that. So it's not like, oh, you're occupied, now you have to get to this goal. There's going to be some flexibility and some ongoing interaction.
Thank you.
Go without that. The next one is actually very minor, number 7. Both versions of the bill require owners or applicants of the level 2 plans to self-monitor their progress towards the TDM goals. But the Eldridge bill would add the language saying the self-monitoring must be conducted in addition to any monitoring conducted by the department. So DOT on its own may want to do some monitoring, and that doesn't absolve the developer or building owner from doing it. Just making it very clear. Okay, number 8, we talked about this a little bit last time too. Again, let's take that Bethesda case. Bethesda, the goal is 55%. New development the goal would be 60%. The Leggett version of the bill, level 3 plans, calls for the DOT director to establish project goal higher or lower. These are pretty vague than that goal. The Eldridge bill puts limits on that by saying it can be either 5% higher or 5% lower. So follow the bouncing ball. 55% is the goal now. For new development, it would be 60. The DOT director would have the authority to go as high as 65% to mandate that needs to be achieved, or could go down as low as 55%, depending upon, for example, where they are in Bethesda. If you're sitting right on top of Metro, you're much more likely to have a higher mode share than if you're on, say, down at Battery Lane or or down at Bradley Boulevard. Our recommendation is to expand that flexibility even more, be 10% higher or lower. So it could be as high as 70% and as low as 50%. And the basis for that really is, well, there's data from WMATA, which is in the top of page 5, and this is actually relatively old data, but there's been off and on anecdotal surveys looking at this kind of thing for a number of years. And you can see the difference between the mode share for an office and residential is about 20% higher if you're basically right on top of Metro versus a half mile away. And half mile away is sort of a magic number because the red areas typically are about a half mile in radius. It's not exactly, because none of those areas are an exact circle, but the general idea is that you go out about a half a mile, and that's what it is. So our recommendation is to basically go 10% higher or lower for that authority rather than just 5%. And I don't know if Chris wants to...
we had a long discussion of this last time, and I think the 10% is probably appropriate in most policy areas that are larger. we would suggest that we stay with the 5% in the red policy areas where we have the emphasis on transit, and they are generally the smallest of our policy areas. But that's the debate, and I don't think we have any broader debate than that on this item.
So I guess that's the question for you, is which way do you want to go? I don't think either of us.
The issue with the range is it just increases the argument or negotiation that we have on the content of the plan, and a narrower range where we expect higher performance is helpful to constrain that conversation with the developers when they come forward with the plan,
But you'd
and to
rather have
constrain us in what we ask for.
You'd rather have a different range in red policy areas.
I think that would be a good way to handle this, yes.
So 5% higher, lower in reds, but 10% higher and lower
And
elsewhere.
any other, yeah. Okay.
Compromise?
Great.
I think it's helpful to constrain what you'll have to fight over.
Yeah.
That'll help the development process,
I think that'll smooth things
It'll
out.
So you can
make it easier for you.
You can later blame your constraints on the council.
Right.
Well, you can get the pack when
The
you can
constraints
get
you
the packet
requested.
out.
The constraints you requested.
It's those darn people across the street. Okay. So that's the committee's recommendation then? We can do that.
Yes.
All right, item number 9. If you turn to circle 32 in the packet, it's basically lines 804 to 825. What you see is the list of items that would be required in the biennial TMD report. The information needs to be reported. The Leggett bill had recommended all 10 of these items. The Elrich bill would delete, let's see, the items, I'm sorry, the level of service measurements for each major intersection policy area, which is number 3, and the status of road or intersection improvement, signal automation, bicycle and pedestrian access and safety, which is number 5. So they would keep the other 8. Our recommendation is to keep all 10 in there, because you really want to have, I think, the full picture of what's happening with all the modes. And actually, this kind of information is pretty easy to get, because number 3 is largely already reported in Park and Planning's biennial monitoring report that they do. They have the highest 50 or 75 intersections in the county and what the level of service is. And they also do it for road segments. And the status of road improvements, that's something that DOT knows. That's what they do. So I don't think it's that much more work, and I think it'd be good to have that all in a report. So that's the difference. So basically, we're agreeing with the list of the 10 things that was in the original bill.
Chris, is this the only place DOT collects data like this in these reports?
No, I mean, we have CIP implementation reports. We have the state transportation implementation reports that we get regularly. The only reason we...
Building by building data like this?
Oh, mode share data? These are the only reports that collect and distribute that information.
Not that it has anything to do with parking capacity, but wouldn't it be useful at some point to have some inclusion of EV charging and EV spaces?
Yeah, I think that's a fine suggestion if we broaden the list. Our deduction of those items was just to simplify these reports and have them focused on the TDM implementation and not the broader transportation question.
Sure.
But if
I
you
know there still
want
could be
broader
others, but-
reporting, then yeah, those sorts of things could be.
Seems like it'd be helpful to some of our other goals. If you were to collect it in one place. There's no other place where you'd get that, right?
No, other than in the parking lot districts where we report that information and do those studies on a routine cycle, but not broadly in other parts of the county.
Okay. Item 10.
So,
So,
Oh, yeah,
Would we
what
include it here?
are you doing? Yeah.
I'm fine if you want to leave the longer list, and if you want to include something like EV charging opportunities.
you could just put it under force of parking supply and demand, including EV charging stations and EV spaces or something. Just seems like it'd be, at some point, I'm probably going to ask you for that data, and you'll say, oh, we didn't collect it, or whatever.
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Item number 10, we had a discussion about this on October 10th as well. This is the survey that goes out, and what should the response rate be? I remind you that the goal in the existing law before the Leggett bill was 80%. There's no penalty for not meeting the goal. It's just a goal. The bill originally from Mr. Leggett was to reduce that to 60%, and my original recommendation was 40%. And the average response rate is 22.5%, if memory serves. So DOT's, you told us to go back and look at this some more, and basically DOT is agreeing with the 40%, but with the caveat, this is the second bullet on page 6, which would add language which would say work sites, buildings, or projects with fewer than 100 employees or residents must use a good faith effort to achieve at least 50%. The reason why, and Chris made this point last time too, which is for small businesses, 40% or some smaller amount doesn't amount to very many responses. It's not statistically reliable. So for something less than 100, 50% gets you at least closer to that, if not there. The director may require a smaller or larger response rate from a given worksite, building, or project based on the requirements for statistical reliability. So, for example, if 40% were the goal, but you have a firm with 1,000 employees, 30%, 25% may be fine in terms of statistical. So, at least council staff agrees with DOT's amended recommendation for that.
I just want to clarify one thing. It is true, there is no penalty implied or even proposed for employers. The participation in the commuter survey, though, is also a part of the development project requirements. So it would be rolled into those projects, and so this would apply as well. It's not just employers, okay, who would be doing these surveys. And then that's actually the case now with our traffic mitigation agreements. That's one of the very basic provisions in our traffic mitigation agreements, is that these development projects will use their good offices to ensure that we're getting good response rates from all of the tenants or all of the occupants, I guess we should say, of that development project. So that would be, I just want to be clear about what we're talking about in terms of the survey. It's not just employers.
Right. And even if there's also thresholds, so that small employers are not getting caught up in this typically, right?
Well, the threshold is for in red areas, if you have 25 or more employees,
Yeah.
you have to do it. If you're in a orange area, it's 100 or more employees, and if you're in a yellow area, it's 200 or more employees.
Right.
So if you're a small firm in an orange or yellow area, you don't have to do this.
Right. He said in orange again, it's
Orange is the policy areas that are not around the metro stations, but the next one's out.
sorry.
So,
What was the threshold in orange again?
100.
100. So if you're a company with fewer than 100 employees and you're not right by the metro, that's probably the bulk of our firms, I would bet. Is you're not closest to the metro, but you're not out in the more exurban areas.
Right.
You don't have to respond unless you have 100 or more employees. It's
As
not
an employer, you do not.
an employer.
But if
As a
you are
development,
in
you
one of
might.
the new development projects
Right.
that's coming in under this, that's the clarification.
Correct. But, so it's not a ton of employers, I'm guessing.
I believe that's right, and that's why it was set up that way, is to not capture
Right.
people who find it a burden to participate.
Exactly. I mean, once you get to that scale, hopefully, and at that point, when you get to that scale, that's really, we need you to help us relieve traffic by getting people out of cars.
And this is also how we are
Exactly right.
evaluating how we're doing with those non-auto driver mode share goals.
Yeah.
So if we don't get a lot of participation in the survey, those conclusions we draw about whether we're achieving those goals are suspect.
I don't know if this will grate at first for people, but we need a culture change here where we have the private and the public sector working together to reduce
Yes.
traffic impacts. And it's got to be an active management program. That's what the whole philosophy of the bill is. So hopefully you'll be able to implement this in a way that people find is,
we do
responsive
get-
and responsible.
We do get people who voluntarily participate. This is useful information for employers, even if they are a smaller employer, in terms of what the employees in their, company are doing in terms of getting to work and how they might be able to facilitate that.
So is there concurrence with?
Sandy, is part of your program to educate small employers about the existence of it, even if they're not required to participate?
Yes, absolutely. And we currently get a lot of voluntary participation in the, what's now called the TMP, the Traffic Management Plan that the employers do. We get a lot of voluntary, because it's just an organizing structure, that's all it is.
What's a lot, do you think? 30%?
Oh, I'd have to check. I mean, I don't know, Beth, voluntary TMPs.
Might get 25% of our responders, 25% of the.
All of the employers. In other words, all
Say
of,
it again.
25% of all of the employers in that TMD might be doing these plans on a voluntary basis.
So
you're okay with the staff
the
recommendation?
40 and 50 split.
And finally, number 11, this is very minor, really. The Leggett bill would require that TMD's community goals are met, or that if a TMD goal is not met within 8 years of its creation or by June 30th, 2027, the DOT director must recommend corrective action to the executive. The Elrich bill would actually stretch that a bit more. It would say, put the deadline at year 2030 or dates established by master plans, whichever is later. Given that the TMDs are likely to roll out, not all at once, but more slowly, we're in concurrence with the Elrich version of the bill.
Can I ask about that? So the Elrich version of the bill, once again, should cause less consternation from the development community, right? For the record. Let me just push back on your recommendation for a minute, though. The language in the Leggett bill being 8 years of its creation or by June 30th, 2027, whichever is later, already accommodates the fact that some of these are not going to come online for a while, and they will then have corrective action, which is vaguely defined, and it could just be a nasty letter or something. It's still 8 years away, or longer for the ones that come in. So it seems very forgiving to say we're not going to have any corrective action of any type, even just flagging this as a problem for 11 years from now, doesn't it? What would be the harm in retaining the Leggett language of saying 8 years or whichever is later?
I don't see the harm in it, actually.
If you want a more stringent deadline, we don't have any objection to that.
As you pay, as.
Well, I mean, in your corrective
It may
action,
not be more stringent, it may be less stringent.
Yeah.
this isn't a big fine
Depends
necessarily.
when the
This is,
TMD gets created. The TMD doesn't get created till 2024. 8 years from that's 2032, and
right.
so it's, in some cases it may be less stringent, in some cases maybe more. Hadn't thought about that.
How it plays out with the master.
Is there preferences for the Leggett version?
So 8 years still seems quite forgiving, but if that's
Well,
the culture we're going for, that's
And
fine.
eight years is consistent with our requirements for the development projects to reach their project goals, so that's the logic of the 8 years.
Right. When we had our multi-jurisdictional briefing, did we hear from other jurisdictions that have more aggressive timelines?
I don't think they set timelines.
Okay.
No, well, I don't remember. We can look at the chart. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't think most set timelines like that. Most are not district-based.
Right. That's true. Okay.
That's it as far as changes to the bill, but I do want to point out that the last work session, Mr. Glass asked for a comparison of what the county's doing versus what we heard in June from Arlington, Fairfax, Alexandria, and DC. And you see those charts on circles 40 through 43, where it shows what if the strategy that's being provided by Alexandria is also provided under the county law now, or if it's in the second column is in the proposal for this bill to do that. And in the last column would be if the strategy is not in current county law and not proposed under Bill 3618. In the case of Alexandria, there aren't any. In the case of Arlington, there are three things. Contributions last for 30 years only, no merit, no mode share goals, and no formal incentives or disincentives, which is what we're not doing. District of Columbia has four things. Campuses, I guess, are counted there. TDM applies to campuses, we're not. Well, the only campuses we really have are Hopkins and,
No, and they have requirements for specific institutional master plans that we
Right.
don't have.
we don't do that. They don't have fees. We would have fees. No formal incentives or disincentives is what DC has. We would have those. And commuter law requires employers of 20 or more to offer at least one type of financial commuter benefit. This program's a little bit different. It's not the same as the way DC does it. Fairfax County, there's one thing that's different, which is the incentive fund is a one-time contribution, as opposed to what we're talking about here, which is maintaining the program that will get you to and keep you at the mode share goal, so it can be a continuing requirement. So that's a sort of a summary of our program versus those other 4 programs. And just the last thing to point out is,
There's no page for Montgomery for comparison.
no, well, this compares, they each compare to Montgomery. So for the first column is
Yeah.
the strategy provided under existing county laws, existing Montgomery County law.
That's why it makes sense to have the column strategy not in current county law and not proposed under Bill 3618. Got it.
Right, okay.
So these are all comparisons to Montgomery.
That won't change after today, okay.
And finally, you would ask for information about what the possible rates or boundaries might be. It's really too early in the game to know that at all. It's a couple steps further down the road. We have to go through the executive regs first, and then eventually what the boundaries would be, and then the rates. So we're probably talking at least 6 months or more off, just in terms of the timing of things. Nevertheless, what DOT has put forward on Circle 44, they point out the amount of square footage for existing development that there is now, and in the red, yellow, and orange policy areas, not including Rockville and Gaithersburg, not including the federal enclaves. And this is essentially the assessable base of what would be the case if you applied it to existing as well as new. So, but and we can try to get more information if you'd like about this, but it's really at this stage, certainly the executive's not ready, even DOT's really not ready to make a recommendation.
No, we would be making recommendations with the TDM or TMD establishments and
Right.
rate resolution
Right.
for this fee. And we're not doing that now or in the near term.
Why are campuses included in DC and not in Montgomery?
They just have a different set of zoning provisions than we do, and they have many, many more healthcare and educational campuses than we do.
Well,
Most of them are not within our control. They're publicly owned, and our laws don't apply.
Is
Or-
either the college or USG,
Or
Right.
they're,
both state institutions?
Right, Montgomery
or
College,
they're federal, the federal.
federal.
some
campuses.
cases, these are campuses.
We work with
right.
the federal agencies on their plans, like NIH and
Yeah, I thought you did.
Walter Reed. They're pretty, or FDA. We work with them on their campuses, but there's no special
And
campus.
what about Montgomery College and USG? I remember asking this 2 years ago. I don't
We
remember.
do work with both of them, yes, but the laws don't necessarily apply to them. We definitely work with them. They're a good example of wonderful voluntary partners.
Okay.
I have to apologize, I have to catch a plane, but one of the things you need to do before you finish today is just decide whether or not you approve the bill with all the changes you've made. Just take a vote and then have any other discussion you'd like to have.
You leaving on a jet plane?
Thanks, Glenn.
Safe travels.
Okay, I assume approving the bill with the amendments that we've discussed?
So
moved.
Okay.
Thank you.
I object.
You voting no?
I'm voting
2-1? Okay. Got it.
I gotta have the floor.
Sure.
Great. So I've expressed concern from day one about this piece of legislation, and I don't think we've worked through really any of the issues. We've had a number of meetings where we have talked with multiple jurisdictions, and we have talked at a level that I don't think has really changed anything. And for those reasons, I remain concerned because we all agree that we need to change the culture and get more people out of single occupancy vehicles, getting them to work and around the community in more environmentally sustainable ways. And the research gives us a roadmap as to how to do that. You know, in 2013, Smart Growth America put together a transportation demand management state of practice report. And on the last page, it tells us, social science research shows us the best incentives to get people to follow these practices. And none of that is codified in this legislation. You know, there are things, subsidized transit passes, market rate parking changes, parking cash out programs, you know, and I'll take a step back and say, you know, we're implementing this or wanting to implement this at the private sector, but we have 10,500 county employees. And you know how many of them currently use any of these programs that we're talking about and trying to get 60% or so of the new private sector employees to take? 77 people out of 10,500. 0.7% of our own workforce commutes the way we're now trying to legislate that employees in Montgomery County get around. And so if we really want to adopt this stuff and move our community in a way that we all agree we have to, and there should be no denying that, there is no daylight between our philosophical opinion here, that this is the direction we need to go. I just disagree that I don't think this really does it. I think this creates more bureaucracy, diverts more funding from some of the direct programs that the social science tells us people will utilize to do what we hope they do. And for that reason, I can't support this legislation.
That's a surprise. Can you, Chris, explain how this strategy embraces some of those tried and true techniques of transportation demand management?
It's true that this legislation in and of itself does not embed the programs Councilmember Glass talked about. What this legislation is trying to do is establish the framework for which those types of programs would be implemented. And when we look at this in combination with the regulations that set the more specific requirements, and then the plans themselves that are required under this bill are the place where the measures that you've talked about would be included so that the projects make progress towards the goals. And
Each
we've done-
development project is
Yeah.
asked to do those kinds of techniques.
And those are the techniques that are promoted to the employers who are participating in the employer-based programs. And if the employers are truly interested in making progress towards the goals, and again, the employer program does not have any action-forcing mechanisms like that, then those are the tools that we recommend to them and help them get access to make those or achieve those goals. So this is purely the organizational framework. It is not the details of the implementation to change the travel behavior. Those come in those other steps, both the regulation and the employer or project-specific plans.
I think what my colleague will find if he were to try to actually make a change on some of those other elements is that the response would be, well, we have no framework to do that. So this is setting up the framework to move towards achieving those goals. So it's a predicate of what you're asking about, but all those elements are there. They're just not mandates in law. They're tools that are used by the organizational capacity that we would build.
Correct. And those are all the things we promote in the existing TMDs.
Right, we use those.
Well, so that point alone, we have these programs, we have these policies. And so it's not like we have to wait for this legislation to create them. They're there.
That's actually not correct.
Yeah, can I address that? We have them right now, and we're able to do this in the TMDs, those 5 sort of smallish areas that we have these policies and programs in effect for. What this legislation does is enable us to work with a much broader segment of the county to implement those kinds of programs and services.
We don't have the authority
Right.
over.
Right.
I might say that we want to make sure we don't confuse the employer program and requirements versus the developer requirements. So the developer requirements in a red policy area has to meet goals. What we did, because we wanted to simplify this, and we were told not to prescribe, but let each individual developer / employer decide what's the best program for their project. But the goal of 55%, 60% in Bethesda has to be met. If you're a large developer over 50,000, whatever it is, over 100,000 square feet, you have so many years to meet that goal. And you have to, even as part of the process, hire a firm to show that you've met the goal of where you are. So this has really teeth to it, and it's up to the employer / developer to come up with the program using those programs that you talked about. That's the only way that they can do that to meet the high non-owner driver remote share goals.
I'd like to mention one thing. One of the items, and it's absolutely true, is market rate parking. So market rate parking is something that under current approach, we always try to have included in our traffic mitigation agreements with developers. Developers are generally the ones who control what the parking arrangement for a major development will be. It's not by the individual tenants or the employer in that building or in that complex. And so that's one reason why we need to work at both ends. We need to work with the developers and we need to work with the employers. So then if a developer establishes market rate parking, then we sometimes have the employer who pays for that parking for their employees. So we try to work with the employer then to adopt policies that at least put their employees on a level playing field. If they're going to pay for parking, we want them to also offer those transit benefits you mentioned. So it's a little bit sort of a chicken and egg issue to some extent. But what this legislation does is enable us to work with a lot more of those developments and a lot more of those employers throughout the county in the way that we currently do in, as I said, those 5 TMDs.
Okay,
Okay.
thank you for that explanation.
All right, thank you all.
Thank
I think that concludes our hearing.
Thanks.